Oh, today we find ourselves in the last couple of chapters of Jeremiah. It's been quite a ride. Today we're in Jeremiah, the 50th chapter. Jeremiah 50 and 51 is a prophecy of Jeremiah concerning the most powerful nation on earth. And at the time of this writing, that was the Babylonian Empire. God is about to declare that Babylon is going to be destroyed. Now I'll call to your attention what we found when we were studying the book of Daniel. That Nebuchadnezzar had a dream twice. And in the dream there was a statue. And the statue had various parts made out of various metals. Some precious, some base, like iron. Some precious, like silver and gold. And as Daniel not only told the king, Nebuchadnezzar, the interpretation of the dream, the condition that the king set, or he was going to kill all his counselors, was that whoever came forward had to tell him the dream without even being told what it was. And only God was able to know the heart and the mind of the king. And he gave the interpretation to Daniel. And he told him that the statue that he saw had a head of gold. And that head of gold represented the kingdom of King Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon. And then as the metals progressed, the metals became more base. The next was silver. Then there was brass. Then there was iron. And eventually, in a representation of the end times, the feet were made of a mixture of clay and iron. When Daniel gave the interpretation to the king, he told him, the gold is you, king, your empire, but it's going to be replaced. And when the empire is replaced, it will be replaced with a lesser empire. But your empire will fall. Daniel told the truth. And that's exactly what happened. Jeremiah 50, verse 1. The word of the Lord spoke against Babylon and against the land of the Chaldeans by Jeremiah the prophet. Declare among the nations, proclaim and set up a standard. Proclaim and do not conceal it. Say, Babylon is taken. Bel is shamed. Merodach is broken in pieces. Now Bel, it's also called Baal. It was the chief god that was worshipped in Babylon. Her idols are humiliated, and her images are broken in pieces. Now, as we read through this, there's something very important to realize. And that is that these prophecies have a fulfillment in the time in which they were written. But there are also elements of these prophecies that concern a representation called Babylon, as we find in Revelations, the 17th and the 18th chapter, speaking of the end time. And they are significant in that the fulfillment that occurred in the time in which this was written was future to the people who received the prophecies. And those portions that are future to the end times and the time of the Great Tribulation are future to us. But as surely as they were fulfilled for the people in the time in which this was written, those elements that are in our future will come to pass, and nothing will stop them. You know, the scripture says the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Those who do not realize that God has given us a book to explain to us the seriousness of having a personal relationship with God, of knowing the truth, and exemplifying the fact that we have faith by our actions. The fact that we hold them as concretely true, knowing that they will occur, is extremely significant. Third verse. For out of the north a nation comes up against her, which shall make her land desolate, and no one shall dwell therein. They shall move, they shall depart, both man and beast. Now the nation that comes out of the north is the nation that Daniel prophesied. It's the Medo-Persian Empire. You see the difference between the Babylonian Empire and the reign of the king, the head of gold, and the Medo-Persian Empire, being of a lesser metal, being silver, was the king of Babylon was bound by no law. He could do whatever he wanted to, no matter what the law was for anybody else. But the Persian Empire, the empire that was an amalgamation of the Medes and the Persians, the king was bound by the law and had to keep the law that he put in place. That's why Daniel went to the lion's den, and the king couldn't stop it, because he was bound by the law after the fall of Nebuchadnezzar, and the Medo-Persians were in power. At the time, you have to understand that at the time that this was written, Babylon was the most powerful nation on earth. They had an army that could not be defeated. They had defeated most of their neighbors. They had, I don't know if you call them colonies or not, but possessions of land that were on every seashore. They had conquered tremendous amounts of land. They had wealth that was unheard of in the world to that time. The city itself was defended in a way that no one had ever seen. They had multiple walls that encompassed the city. The outer wall was 300 feet high and 80 feet thick. You didn't just walk up to the wall, take a small pick, and decide you were going to invade. The inner walls, while smaller, were in concentric rings, and the people inside felt absolutely secure. Nothing could penetrate the defenses, and their army, being absolutely indefilable, that had always won ultimately. Between the two, they had no fear of anyone except the king. And listen to what's said. Jeremiah is giving a message. In those days and in that time, says the Lord, the children of Israel shall come, they and the children of Judah together. With continual weeping they shall come and seek the Lord their God. You know, at this point, it seemed like Babylon would never pass away. They had everything working for them. And Israel, puny little Judah. Midge and I were talking just before the service today. Do you realize that Israel is an absolute postage stamp? They never conquered all the land that God gave them. Their border was supposed to be the Euphrates River. And they didn't conquer all the land. You can fit 5 Israels in the state of Oregon, and Oregon's smaller than the state of Washington. They're a postage stamp. And at this time, the mightiest nation on earth, huge in its scope, holdings everywhere, a military that was unbeatable. God is saying, Israel will never pass away. And that nation was doomed. Now, one of the questions you might ask is, wait a minute, I seem to remember there, preacher, that you were saying that God's word declared that Babylon was God's servant, that God sent them to Judah. So why is he going to destroy them for doing what he told them to do? And here's the answer, and I hope it becomes apparent as we go through these last chapters. They weren't punished because of what they did at God's direction. They were punished because of the way they treated the Jews when they were in captivity. Do you remember a promise that was given to Abraham? Genesis 12:3. I'll bless those who bless you, and I'll curse those who curse you. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if it's an individual or if it's a country. It doesn't matter if they believe in God or if they don't believe in God. It makes no difference whatsoever. And one of the things that I want to point out here, folks, and keep this in mind as we go through this, a lot of the things that we see in Babylon, we see in our country today, in the United States of America. And there are those who say, listen, man, you're going off the rails. The reality is, this is written to a people hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and it has nothing to do with us. Let me point out something. What you're hearing here is the statement of God against a non-Jewish nation. This is the will of God in punishment to a country that was not part of the chosen people because of their actions, including the way that they treated Israel. My Bible tells me that God never changes. Never. So what am I trying to say? Friends, our Congress needs to clean up its act because there are those there that are advocating for things that are hurtful to the Jewish people. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, and it's dangerous because God has given ample evidence that he is perfectly willing to judge and to punish any nation that violates that promise to Abraham and the nation of Israel. Verse 5. They shall ask the way to Zion with their faces toward it, saying, come and let us join ourselves to the Lord in his perpetual covenant that will not be forgotten. His perpetual covenant. Now, why would they be asking people the way to Zion? 70 years will have passed. Most of those people were born in Babylon. They've never even seen Israel. And they're asking the way to get back to their country. My people have been lost sheep. Their shepherds had led them astray. They have turned away on the mountains. They have gone from mountain to hill. They have forgotten their resting place. They've been in a place where the false gods were worshipped on the mountains and on the hills. All who found them have devoured them. And their adversaries said, we have not offended because they have sinned against the Lord, the habitation of justice, the Lord, the hope of their fathers. Now listen to this. The Babylonians, persecuted the Jews in their country, saying, there's nothing wrong with that. They turned against their own God. And because they turned against their own God, they deserve what they get. You know what? The world has heard that before. 1930s, Germany. They're less than human. They crucified Christ. And they deserve whatever they get. The final solution. Move from the midst of Babylon. Go out of the land of the Chaldeans, and be like the rams before the flock. Behold, I will rise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country, Medo-Persians, and they shall array themselves against her. From there she shall be captured. Their arrows shall be like those of an expert warrior. None shall return in vain. Now, when he speaks to the north country, we know that that's exactly what happened. The Medo-Persians invaded with extreme cunning. And we'll talk about how they took that and how Daniel was there when that happened. If you remember the story in brief, they didn't make a head-on assault on the walls because there was a river that traveled under the walls right into the kingdom, and it was their fresh water source. And when they knew the king was throwing a huge party and had commanded his servants to bring the instruments of worship, the vessels that had been ripped off from the Jewish temple, and he was going to serve his guests wine in them, that a hand appeared. Now, if you were half in the bag and a hand with no body appears in front of everybody and starts writing something on the wall, I think it would get my attention. And they called the wise men and nobody could interpret it. Except one man that somebody remembered was still around. He's in his 90s.